Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone, members, officers and members of the public to this meeting of the Planning Control Committee. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee clerk, Chanel Wickenden, to explain how proceedings will work and to undertake a roll call of those attending online to ensure they can hear and be heard. Thank you, Chanel.
Thank you, Chair. Can I confirm that the following officer is in attendance and can hear us and we can hear them? Nuranata Katavu.
Apologies. Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. No problem. Are there any other officers in attendance remotely? Okay. Moving on, we'll go through the rules of the debate. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted of your request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. When the public participants are invited to speak, their microphones will be made live by the committee officer. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. And details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and the result will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Apologies for absence. I received apologies from Councillor Nigel Mason, Terry Tyler and David Levitt. Having given due notice, Councillor Michael Muir will be substituting for Councillor David Levitt. Councillor Cathy Brownjohn will be substituting for Councillor Nigel Mason. Are there any further apologies? No. Item 2, minutes of the meeting on the 6th of April 2023. I propose that we take as read and approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of April 2023 as a true record of proceedings. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Tyson?
Yes, I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. Any comments on the minutes from the 6th of April 2023? Okay. Should we go to the vote? Sorry. And you can't vote if you weren't here. So if you're new, you can't vote. For those observing, for some councils, this is their first planning meeting.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. Notification of other business, there is none. Chair's announcements, recording. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on ModGov and the film recording via the NHDC YouTube channel. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out on the chair's announcements on the agenda. To clarify matters to the registered speakers, the members of the public have 5 minutes for each group of speakers, supporters and objectors. There's a separate 5-minute time limit allocated to member advocates. A warning will be given at 4 minutes to alert you that you have 1 minute left. At 5 minutes, you'll be advised the time allowed has ended and the speaker must cease. For the purpose of clarification, in order to vote on an agenda item at this meeting, a member must be present for the entirety of the debate and the consideration for that item. If a member leaves the room at any point of the item, they will not be able to vote. Item 5, public participation. Can I confirm the following registered speakers are in attendance? County Councillor Fiona Hill. Councillor Gerald Morris. Parish Councillor Diane Burley. Councillor Claire Strong. Claire Fawcett. Phil Davis. Councillor Keith Hoskins. Next. Will Berry. Item 6. 22/02225/FP, Nichols Yard, Crowland, Reed, Hertfordshire. Tom Ray to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. I do have just one matter for updating the committee this evening on this particular item. And this is advice which comes from the Historic Environment Advisor at Hertfordshire County Council. The officer is Daniel Phillips, and Mr. Phillips would like to offer the following advice, having read the archaeological desk-based assessment which has been submitted in support of this application. The officer comments that the assessment has demonstrated that the site lies within a rich and potentially significant archaeological landscape. This is focused on prehistoric activity in the form of burial grounds either side of Reed and on the same topographical alignment, and then later Anglo-Saxon and medieval activity for Reed as a settlement itself. Within the medieval settlement, Reed is quite odd in that it has so many moated sites, which is uncommon, and therefore the officer considers there's a lot of archaeological questions that remain. The officer advises that the assessment has demonstrated all of this, and as a result indicates the potential for the site. Therefore, the County Council would like to request further predetermination work in the form of a geophysical survey of the site, followed by targeted trial trenching if the results of the geophysical survey warrant it. The officer finally advises that if the site proceeds, he will be happy to provide further guidance on the exact nature of the survey and subsequent evaluation that would be required. So if I could go on to these slides, Chair. The first slide before you shows the application site, which is just over half a hectare in area, located to the eastern end of the village of Reed. The site is just to the south of Crow Lane and north of the Nichols Farm development, which was previously part of the Wisbridge Farm site. To the immediate east of the site is arable farmland, and to the north of the site is a listed building at North Farm, and to the south a further listed building at Wisbridge Farm. A public footpath runs through the eastern part of the site. That's public footpath 005, which connects with the High Street further to the southwest. Next slide, please. This photograph shows the site entrance off Crow Lane, and you'll see that the site is entrance is quite an informal arrangement with the farmland in the background and the Crow Lane carriageway to the left of that photograph. Crow Lane is a quite a narrow carriageway with high hedgerows, particularly on the southern boundary. It doesn't have any footpaths and there isn't any lighting along that carriageway. Next photograph, please. Beg your pardon. This shows the entrance to the site, the existing vehicular entrance serving the Nichols Farm development, which you might just be able to make out in the background. The two parts of the site are to the left and the right there. To the right, there will be 3 dwellings, and to the left, 4 dwellings. Next slide, please. This photograph shows a closer view of the Wisbridge Farm development, which consists of a number of dwellings forming conversions or new build dwellings on the original farm buildings site. And the eastern part of the site with some tree planting is in the foreground of this photograph. Next slide, please. Again, a similar shot across the eastern part of the site with the open farmhand to the left, just beyond the public footpath. Next slide, please. Again, this is the eastern part of the site with a gated farm access leading to the farmland beyond. Next slide, please. This is the public footpath 005, which runs north-south through the site. This is the southern aspect, showing the two modern houses forming part of the Wisbridge Farm development. Next slide, please. And this is the same footpath looking north, and in the background there is one of the listed buildings, North Farmhouse. Next slide, please. And again, this is the vehicular entrance to the site, but this time looking the opposite way down Crow Lane, with the western part of the site just over that existing hedge. Next slide, please. And the same western part of the site, this time looking northwest across that part of the site. Next slide, please. And just a little bit further back with the western part of the site on the left and the vehicular access to Crow Lane on the right. Next slide, please. This is the site plan showing the existing Nichols Yard carriageway and the housing development to the south, and linear housing development along Crow Lane to the north of the site. Next slide, please. This is the site layout. You'll see that it's effectively in two parts. On the western part of the site, which is the south there, a short terrace of 3 units. And on the eastern side of the site, to the north on this plan, are 4 housing units. All of the dwellings on both sides of the access road are 2-storey. And the vehicular access to the eastern part of the site is off the existing roundabout on that plan. Next slide, please. So these are the floor plan layouts for units 1, 2, and 3. First and ground floor. Next slide, please. And these are the same units, but with the front, rear, and side elevations. A traditional design with traditional features such as chimneys, porches, arched brick headers, etc. Next slide, please. This is Unit 4, one of the detached dwellings on the eastern part of the site, showing the ground and first floor and parking arrangements. Next slide, please. Same unit, front and rear elevations, showing the timber cladding and tiled materials that will be used for the dwelling. Next slide, please. This is the layouts for units 5 and 6, a pair of semi-detached dwellings here showing the ground and first floors. These are 3-bedroom units. Next slide, please. And the elevations for units 4, 5, and 6, again showing the timber cladding and plain tiles for the as the main materials, and also in the bottom left-hand corner there, the shared carport block between those units. Next slide, please. These are units 4, 5, and 6, the north and western elevations, and you'll see the carport there, a different aspect to that. That's showing the entrance into the car park with a cycle bin store to the right-hand side. Next slide, please. And again, the floor layouts for Unit 7, one of the detached units within that eastern part of the site. I think that is the last of the slides, Chair. If I could just summarise on the application, the site, as I've mentioned, is within the boundary of the settlement of Reed, and policy SP2 of the local plan says that general development will be allowed within the defined settlement boundaries. The applicants contend that the proposals will contribute towards the council's 5-year housing supply, and assist in the completion of 20% of new homes within the planned period. The council now has a 5-year land supply following the adoption of the local plan, and therefore the tilted balance in favour of sustainable development as set out in the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, is not therefore automatically engaged in this case. However, we should still give appropriate weight to the benefits of new housing and balance these benefits against any harms that arise from that new housing when assessed against the policies in the plan and also the policies in the NPPF. In this case, I've acknowledged in the report that the proposal would be in tune with government advice in terms of boosting the supply of new housing. However, in the planning balance, I conclude that there are limited benefits from the provision of the 7 dwellings in the context of the overall housing need in the district, and especially as there is no affordable housing, and the small scale of the development means that there's no mechanism through a Section 106 agreement to mitigate the impact of the development on local services, such as the local school, for example, and those facilities maintained by the parish council. I have concluded that there would be significant harm to the open rural character of the area through this development, and significant harm to the setting of the conservation area, as well as an adverse visual impact, as may be experienced by users of the public footpath and the adjacent highway. The harms that I've identified cumulatively outweigh the limited benefit of the delivery of new housing and provide a clear reason, in my opinion, for refusing the development. And therefore, I would ask members to support the officer recommendation as set out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do any of the members of the committee have any questions of clarification? Tom? No? I thank you, Tom. If we're going to the registered speakers, first of all, objectors, please can I ask Fiona Hill to speak?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and members of the committee for allowing me to speak. As the local county councillor, I have lodged an objection which is in the officer report, and I fully endorse the views of Reed Parish Council, residents, and the officer's recommendation to refuse this application. I've been asked if I would read a statement for the parish council, who apologise for not being present at the meeting. They respectfully wish, nevertheless, to state here that they fully endorse the officer's report and its recommendation that this application be refused. In particular, we welcome the weight in the officer's report given to the existence of a still to be built out allocated site in Reed in the adopted local plan. RD1 is expected to provide for any further housing growth in Reed, including affordable housing, something not offered by the present application. This means the development in this application is not needed in Reed. Since 2011, the village has already experienced a 10.5% increase in housing, the kilns plus infills. Point 2. We also welcome the officer's report acknowledgement that policy SP2 of the local plan should be applied with sensitivity in category A villages like Reed, taking account of local circumstances and needs. We commend the report's attention to the features that make up the distinctive rural character of Reed and its conclusion that the development proposed would harm these. To quote, "The application site is essentially the only underdeveloped space within the new village boundary, and as such, its value as an area of open land contributing towards the open character of the village is of particular importance." 4.22. Point 3. Finally, we welcome and fully support the judgment of the planning officer and the council's conservation officer in respect of this application. They conclude that both in design and location, the proposed development is harmful to the Reed Conservation Area. As the report says, the proposed development would detract from the open rural character of the site, and this, together with its inappropriate scale and urbanising effect, would have an adverse effect upon the character and appearance of the surrounding area. 6.1.2. Given all this, alongside other reasons set out in its earlier submission, Reed Parish Council requests that members follow the planning officer's recommendation in this case and refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Hill. Members, any points of clarification for councillor Hill? No, right, thank you. Can we move on to member advocate, councillor Gerald Morris?
Thank you, Chair. I've always supported Reed Parish Council's comments that this particular application should be refused. I also supported the officer's similar conclusion that the application should be refused. I'll just paraphrase some of the officer's comments. The NHDC Conservation Officer raises a variety of objections. Next point that's mentioned. The application site was part of a previous granted planning permission, which stated that this land should remain undeveloped and should be landscaped. I think it's wrong for the developer to try and circumvent this. The proposal would have an adverse effect upon the character and appearance of the surrounding area. Next point. The proposal would therefore conflict with framework paragraphs requiring enhancement to heritage assets of the village. Next point. Environmentally, the application is not accompanied by a biodiversity net gain metric. Environmentally, the application is not supported by an energy assessment. As has been mentioned already, there is no affordable housing proposed. Finally, whilst not part of the officer's report, the sewage in Reed discharges directly into the Thurfield Sewage Treatment Plant, which is a village nearby, which, as the committee may know, is already substantially over its capacity and regularly discharges raw sewage into the so-called pristine chalk stream that is the River Rib. Until the treatment plant is upgraded, this additional housing would further exacerbate the raw sewage overspill, and it will be an ongoing environmental problem. I do hope that the committee will refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Morris. Are there any points of clarification from members? No? Okay. Can I invite the officer to respond to any issues raised?
Nothing else to add, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Daniel Allen.
I propose that we refuse this as per the recommendations of our officers 6.11, 6.12 and 6.13.
We have a seconder. Councillor Mule.
Yes, I have no problem in seconding this application.
Thank you. Is there any debate on this? Anyone want to say anything? Right, should we go to the vote? About which way we're voting here?
Okay, so it's yes to refuse.
Yeah, just restarted.
The motion to refuse is carried.
Thank you. Item 7, 22/03245 stroke FPH 5 High Street, Purton. Thomas Howe to present.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. I've no updates to provide since no changes since my report was submitted. However, since consultation, some labels were added to the plans just to advise that heritage roof lights are proposed to the extension and also to the main roof slope of the dwelling. Please can we start the presentation? Thank you. Next slide, please. The highlighted plot is number 5. To the north is number 3, part of a terrace of 3 dwellings with store buildings out to the rear garden area. The site is within the Purton Conservation Area, and the actual application property is not listed, but the property to the south, number 7, known as Orchard Cottage, is Grade 2 listed. Access to the dwelling and the garden is provided from the front porch and also through a gate access down between number 5 and number 3. And, please can we have the next slide? Next slide again, please. So this is a view from High Street with number 5 on the right with the brick-built porch and the cream render, the gable to the right, forming number 5. Next slide, please. This is number 7, the listed property to the south of the site, and the gable on the left is number 5, the application dwelling. Next slide, please. This is a view from within the garden looking towards the rear, approximately about halfway down the garden, and then, of course, looking away from the dwelling. Next slide, please. This is looking back towards the dwelling with the detached outbuilding in the foreground, the building proposed to be demolished as part of its application, adjoining the neighbouring outbuilding and store. The main dwelling is that to the left. Next slide, please. This is looking towards number 7, the listed property, and the party boundary with the fence shown it. Number 5, of course, to the right. Next slide, please. And then a more zoomed out view and a bit further down the garden from about approximately the rear elevation of that store outbuilding. And then again, looking towards number 7. Next slide, please. And then just turned a bit right, looking between the rear elevation of number 5 and the outbuilding, and that of number 3 and their outbuilding as well. Next slide, please. And then just a bit closer to number 5, looking back down the garden with number 7 on the right and towards that store that's proposed to be demolished. Next slide, please. This is the existing floor plan, ground floor plan, with that gate access just shown to the top. Next slide, please. And this is the proposed ground floor plan with, next slide, please. This is the existing first floor plan. Next slide, please. And this is proposed first floor plan, of course, with the roofs of the ground floor elements indicated. Next slide, please. This is the existing principal and rear elevations of the dwelling, of course, with the existing principal on the left. Next slide, please. And these are the proposed principal and rear elevations with those annotations added indicating of the heritage roof lights proposed. I believe the heritage roof lights will have a glazing bar down the middle. Next slide, please. And then existing and proposed side elevation. So this is the elevation that will face number 7. Next slide, please. And then this is the opposite elevation as viewed from number 3's side. Next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Any questions from members? Councillor Pearce.
The comments from the neighbour at number 3 said that their outbuilding was adjoined to the one at number 5. So how would that be dealt with?
I believe possibly a party wall agreement, but that is a civil matter and is not material in this decision.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Tyson?
Yeah, sorry. Is it possible to go back to one of the slides, the one with the garden? Because I think that in my mind's eye, I was looking at it in the wrong direction. Is it possible just to have another look at that? There we go. That one.
Is that the one?
Yes. So we're in the garden of the application site there. Okay. Looking towards the house, away from the house. Okay. Thank you.
Any other points of clarification and questions? Thank you, Thomas. Can I go to the rest of the speakers, please? Objectives first of all to Diane Burley.
Thank you, Chair. I first should make it clear that the Parish Council does not object to a more modest extension to this property. We understand the wish of a young family for more space, but this proposal is just too large and dominant in a very small and very cramped space. The property, as you've heard, is in a conservation area. It forms one of 3 late 19th century terrace cottages of very modest proportions. They are 13.5 feet wide, that's all, with a narrow garden, 13.5 feet wide to 15 feet at its greatest point. It is also listed in the Purton Neighbourhood Plan along with numbers 1 and 3 as a non-listed important building of local interest, because these 3 properties are considered important examples of local building types. So this is a very sensitive area. Given that context, the proposal does not meet our Neighbourhood Plan Policy 8, your Neighbourhood Plan Policy 8, as it does not conserve or enhance the heritage assets that are number 7, number 5, number 3, or number 1. The Conservation Officer, as you've read, simply says it does no harm to the setting of the listed building, number 7, but that's not the only consideration and takes no account of PNP 8 or indeed the local plan D3. Because of the impact on the residential amenity of neighbours, it doesn't meet the Neighbourhood Plan's Policy 3 on extensions either. The extensions are clearly not subservient to the host building, and amenities such as daylight and sunlight are not safeguarded. Again, this is a slightly different test to that in the local development plan, but equally valid when applied to Purton planning applications. On the question of subservience, the proposed extensions are taller at more than 10 feet than the current extension and outbuildings. The house and the part of the garden taken up by the proposed extension is only just over 13 feet 6 inches wide. The proposed kitchen is about 12 feet and 3 inches wide, so there's very, very little wriggle room. And that's why it is jammed next to the boundary fence of number 7. You might want to look at that slide again and see that there is absolutely no space between the building and the boundary fence of number 7. The footprint of the current house is 40 square metres. If you include the store, it's 46, but I don't quite know why you'd include the store. The footprint after the extension will be 69 square metres. That's a 50% to 75% increase in the square footage in a very small area. We say, therefore, it does not respond positively to the local context, is not sympathetic to the original home, and dominates the adjoining houses, particularly number 7. And I've been to number 7 and looked at all of this from the point of view of number 7, and looked out of the windows that face on to the, as you've seen, face onto the garden, that will face on to a 10-foot high wall. There's about 20 inches of path around number 7, then the boundary fence, and then immediately a 10-foot high building. The rooms currently are light and airy. You see the sky, you see the buildings in West Lane, you see the little garden store, and the proposal will completely, no feeling of space whatsoever. And the complete blocking of natural light is a significant and harmful adverse impact on the residential amenity of number 7. We also object to the extensive use of roof lights. It's a conservation area, and your draft conservation and management plan for Purton already criticises the number of roof lights in the conservation area. We don't object to the rear roof lights. The bedroom that is proposed up there needs some light, but we don't see the necessity of front roof lights, heritage or not. as daylight in a modest bedroom will already be provided by the rear ones. The roof lights on the extension are also not necessary for light. The kitchen dining room will have windows along one wall and patio doors at one end. There's no real argument that roof lights are needed, but instead pose a problem of light pollution affecting all of the immediate neighbours in this crowded corner, and in particular number 7, and will be detrimental to night insects, moths, bats, etc. Mr. and Mrs. Sexton have kindly agreed to put in blinds. I'm sure you've read that in the report. And no doubt they will use the blinds because they're very nice people. But whoever comes after them might not be so nice. And this is an application about a property, not about people. They are not necessary and they should be refused. And we have therefore asked that this application be refused in its entirety. And Mr. and Mrs. Sexton be encouraged to come forward with a more modest proposal in keeping with this corner of Purton in the conservation area as a non-listed important building of local interest, and one that will not have such a detrimental effect on the residential amenity of neighbours, in particular number 7, and indeed, as you will have read from the report, number 3.
Thank you. Any points of clarification from councillors? Councillor Nolan.
Can I just clarify, sorry, the status of the 3 buildings there? You said they were listed and I didn't quite catch the rest.
It's listed, sorry, thank you, Chair. It's listed in our Purton neighbourhood plan. Local communities are encouraged to list buildings of local interest in their plans, and that provides some sensitive protection for them. And so it's a non-listed important building of local interest.
Thank you, Councillor Daniel Allen.
You mentioned that the overall floor plan would go to between 50 and 75% increase. That's a massive difference. Could you be a bit more specific, please?
Yes, sorry, I tried to cut down the words, so I fit my 5 minutes in. The current footprint of the current house is 40 square meters. If you add on the store, it's 46. I'm not quite sure why you would add on the store, but Mr. Howe very kindly gave me all these figures. He was most helpful, and I am grateful to him. But if you keep the 46 square meters, that'll be a 50% increase. But if you think that the store is irrelevant, that would be a 75% increase in the footprint. So that accounts for the difference.
Any other queries? Thank you very much. Can we go on to Member Advocate, Councillor Claire Strong, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have come tonight to support the views of the Parish Council in respect to this application. I think Councillor Mrs. Burley has dealt very well with a number of the concerns that form the basis of the objections from the Parish Council and the negative comments from the neighbours. The report highlights the key issues, which is the size of the extension and its impact. As members can see on the plans, the footprint of the new extension only covers a very small part of the existing footprint of the detached building, which is going to be demolished. Most of the new extension is on the other side of the plot, covering existing garden and borders number 7. As you have heard, it is the view of the Parish Council that the extension is dominant to the existing 2-up, 2-down cottage. This is a very large extension to the cottage and takes up a large part of a very small garden. The site is also in the conservation area and adjacent to number 7, which is a grade 2 listed building. I did look on the planning portal to see if there was a report from the conservation officer, but none has been published. In the officer's report, the officer takes the view that the proposed development conforms to Purton's Neighbourhood Plan Policy PNP3. Mrs. Burley disagrees. For those that are not familiar with this policy, it states, residential extension proposals will be supported if 3.1, they are subservient to the host building. It is the view of the Parish Council that it is not, as the living footprint is a decrease and it's either 50% or nearly 75%, whichever calculation you want to use. That is not subservient. The scale, height and roof are complementary to the host building and the character of the street scene. There is a lot of new roof and roof lights, which are not in keeping with traditional cottages. They have to be made of materials that are sensitive and complementary to the host building. And again, roof lights are not in keeping with that building, that old cottage buildings. The spacing between buildings respects the character of the street scene. Well, there is a limited street scene, but there is no space between the extension and the neighbour's boundary. I think you saw from the photograph, and you also saw from the elevation view, what is going to be visible by number 7. It's a 10-foot wall. And 3.5 in that policy, it talks about amenities such as access, noise, privacy, daylight, sunlight, and outlook of adjoining residents are safeguarded. This proposal is contrary to all of these. The last point in this policy is on parking, but as there is it's all on-road parking, that's not applicable. You will know, members, that, and particularly new members from your training, that you have to ask the question yourself, what is the harm that would result? This application seeks to place a large extension along the border of a listed building. It will reduce the natural light to the building, and at night, all those roof lights will, unless blackout blinds are used, cause light pollution. This will impact living conditions on the neighbouring properties. The officer's report does recognise that there will be overshadowing and loss of light, but doesn't consider it to be excessive. And I would ask, have any measurements actually been done to support this, and what were they? I would also draw your attention to our local plan on page 71, which states in 4.121, design is central to good planning. The achievement of high quality sustainable design is required by government. Planning policies should promote high quality inclusive design in layouts and buildings in terms of function and impact. Design which does not make the most of opportunities to improve the character and quality of an area should be refused. So, what the committee must decide, do you agree with the planning officer that there's no impact to this development, or you support the views of the parish council who are objecting to this application and supporting the neighbours who will be impacted if this extension is built? I would urge the committee to refuse the application on the grounds that it does not meet policy PNP3 Appurtenance Neighbourhood Plan, which is now incorporated into our own local plan, and it will have an adverse effect. It will have an adverse impact on the character and appearance of the area. And I do hope that members have visited the site to appreciate this, although the photographs give you some indication of what would be built to the neighbours. And also this will have an adverse impact on living conditions on the neighbouring properties and on the environment. However, there's always a however with me, if committee are minded to grant, then could we please have some conditions that actually restrict working hours so they do not disturb the close neighbours when this is being built, that there is a condition on the paving for the gardens to allow it to be pervious, and that the condition on the blinds, that there is a condition that blinds must be put into the roof lights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, can you just repeat the conditions again? Because I was being passed a note, I didn't hear them.
Okay, can I have a little bit more
Yes.
time then? Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So if you are minded to grant, I was just looking at the conditions that the officer has actually put on his recommendation for approval. Obviously, I'm hoping that you're minded not to and to refuse on the grounds I've given you. But I do think that you need to have some conditions on the working hours so that when this extension is built, it does not have disturb the close neighbours. So that's, the usual hours of 8 till 6, Monday to Friday. I don't think working at weekends is acceptable when this is so close to residents. The condition on the paving for it to be impervious, and a condition that blinds must be in any roof lights that are put onto the building. But obviously the way that it's looking, the outlook at the front, to actually put those heritage lights onto the front of the building when you've got the heritage, it is a heritage site, as Mrs. Burley would be totally really unacceptable.
Thank you. Thank you for repeating that. I've got it now. Thank you. Can I go to members? Are any points of clarification for members? No. Can I then please go on to supporters to Charlotte Fawcett?
Good evening. I'm the architect for the extension, and my focus is to provide a single-storey extension for a young family to thrive and grow. My clients are a family of 4, Mr. Richard Sexton, who grew up in the village, and his parents are residents for 42 years in the village. Mrs. Emma Sexton is a teacher at the school, where both children attend and her mother has recently moved into Purton. They contribute enormously to the village life and have alongside both sets of parents for mutual benefits. In order for this family to thrive and grow, they require a larger house. They wish to remain in the village, but due to the lack of affordable 2 to 3 bedroom houses in Purton, they have no other option than to extend their current house. Currently, the cottage comprises of 45 metres squared of living accommodation, and the recommended space standards for a 2-bed property is 79 metres squared. The cottage does also not meet adequate building regulations and space standards. It is at the end of the terrace in the conservation area and located adjacent to number 7 High Street, a Grade 2 listed building. The listed building faces away from the cottage, its rear elevation to the boundary, with 2 small ground floor windows and no overlooking issues onto number 5. Number 5 benefits from a very long garden and extends 25 metres from their existing rear wall. In my feasibility study, I have carefully assessed the site along with my client's brief. I understand my client's current difficulties, their lack of suitable living accommodation, and unfairness in finding alternative affordable accommodation in Purton. Although number 5 is very small, it does benefit from a long private garden to the rear with no overlooking. My conclusions were that a single-storey extension could be appropriate for the site to replace a tired existing bathroom and outhouse, whilst taking into consideration the rear access behind the cottages, the existing drainage, and the orientation of the sun and the long garden. I was also mindful of the adjacent listed building of potential harm that this may cause, and since consulted with the owner, Mr. Derek Kefford. Where we are now, the extension has been recommended for approval by the planning officer. The conservation officer has no objection to the extension, so why has the parish council objected? It was concluded from the neighbourhood plan survey in 2015, where 80% of households took part, that most important housing need in Purton is for local people, young families and elderly. Thus, the neighbourhood plan evolved. I may ask at this point why the parish council is acting completely unfairly and seemingly against the basic principles of the Purton neighbourhood plan, which has support for young families and the elderly at its core. To quote the neighbourhood plan, PMP1, meeting local and wider needs, it has regard for the needs for young families looking for 2 to 3 bedroom properties, which may include semi-detached and terraced housing. Unfortunately, the new housing developments recently built in Purton have little provision for small affordable house types of 2 to 3 beds, and along with inflated house prices, increased interest rates that have led my clients to extend rather than to buy. 1 minute left. To conclude, I would like to respond to the parish council objections. Residential amenity to number 7 and maintenance. I have consulted with Mr. Derek Kefford, the owner of number 7, taken time to listen to his concerns and taking into account the potential harm of his listed building. He understands the reasons why his neighbours would like to extend their house and supports this. I have answered his concerns regarding the location and height of the extension wall and access arrangements for the builders, which he was happy with. The path of approximately 800 mil exists between number 7 and the boundary fence. Number 7 has 2 ground floor windows, utility and bathroom, with no first floor windows on the north elevation. The proposed extension will be approximately 200 mil off the boundary to allow for the depth of the gutter and downpipe and fascia board, and all construction will take place on number 5. His fence will remain in place, and the extension will and can be constructed of brickwork that will require no maintenance. The height of the extension is taller than the existing extension because it does not meet current building regulation standards.
Sorry, Charlotte, I'm going to have to stop you.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was listening too hard. I apologise to Sarah Chang. So I was listening and thinking. Thank you. Do we have any questions or clarification for Charlotte from the members? Councillor Bloxham.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, could you just go over the rooms that the two windows serve in number 7?
Number 7 has a utility room and a bathroom. And so they are ground floor, and they are at the rear north elevation, and they look out across the boundary fence. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Tyson.
Thank you. We've been told that the neighbours will look out on a 10-foot high wall. You were just about to explain how high the extension would be. Could you just complete the sentence that you were?
Extension, currently the existing extension is a single story with a flat roof, and currently it doesn't meet building regulations. So inside the property is 1.9 meters high internally, and the minimum building regs is 2.1. And the insulation probably is minimal on the existing, so we probably need to add another 300 mil onto the existing just purely to meet building regs. So that would be 2.1. Then you'd have the thickness of the rafters, and so yeah, roughly. I mean, I don't know exactly the depth of the rafters, but it would roughly be about 2.5 high.
Does that answer your question? Any other questions? Can I go back to the officer, please?
Thank you, Chair. So with regards to the Conservation Officer comments, I held a surgery discussion with the Conservation Officer during a meeting, discussed the plans, showed some pictures, had a look on the street view, and he just said, I don't have any comments to add. He did say a possible solution to a parish council objection would be to reduce the roof lights, which we did to the side. I believe it was down from 5 to 3. But he didn't make a formal representation. It was more just as I say, a surgery discussion. With regards to the proposed conditions, I don't have any objections to them, though I don't believe the blinds condition is enforceable, and therefore that's why the informative is just there. I'm not sure it is enforceable, but that's just why that informative is there. With regards to the light to number 7, because it's a single story extension, I don't believe we need to do a daylight sunlight test. However, I did consider the light impact, and also I believe I gave weight to the light colour render proposed. And also with regards to the comments about why I included the store in my calculations to you, it was more just the extension is replacing part of the footprint. So that outbuilding is being demolished, and I consider it kind of the unit of the house. And so because it's been demolished, I just gave weight to that. And that was just why the figure of 50% was quoted. Also, a possible solution would be to condition the emission of the front roof lights. I believe there's some concern about that in the street scene, so that's a possible way forward from my perspective.
So Diane, please. Diane, I'm waiting for Thomas to actually finish what he's saying. I thought it was just a pause as he's reading through his notes.
Also, I believe I discussed the matter with Councillor Brown about maintaining the access. So the boundary line is not moving. The fence will remain. And I believe, as Charlotte said, there's a 0.8 metre wide footpath remaining down the side. So yes, I have no further comments to add beyond that, and pass it back.
I'm afraid there's not a point here where you can actually respond. I've now got to ask the councillors if there is a proposer. Councillor Danny Allen.
Well, I actually had a question first, if
Fine.
possible.
Fine, carry on.
The question was, did we actually have a formal complaint from number 7?
I don't believe we had a formal representation. I believe they provided a neutral representation rather than objection.
In that case, I would like to make the proposal that we approve this with conditions. That we approve this with the conditions that the front roof lights are removed from the design, that there are conditions of hours of development, and there is impervious paving put in. I think that this is the right kind of development for supporting people to stay within the village. I do think this is the right kind of thing that we should be supporting.
So we have a proposer. Do we have a seconder, Councillor Muir?
No, I don't want to second
You
it.
want to-
I would like to see
Okay.
the photograph of those roof lights at the front so that we can make up our mind whether we back the proposal from Daniel Allen.
Yeah.
Might take a few seconds.
That's the back.
So it's, yeah, the one you just had. That one there, yeah?
Yeah.
So Councillor Muir, if you'd like to comment, tell us what you're looking at.
I'm quite happy with those roof lights at that height at the front.
Why should they?
Councillor Allen?
Very difficult to concentrate when we're constantly getting comments from people behind that shouldn't be speaking.
So we're at the position where, let me get this straight, we have a proposal with conditions. We now need to look at this roof light condition because Councillor Allen is saying without roof lights, is that correct? And Councillor Muir is saying with roof lights. Do we have any debate on that, please? Councillor Bloxham?
Well, to what Councillor Muir has said, really, I can't see there's a very well, there's any advantage by getting rid of those at all. I'm more concerned with a little bit further towards the back.
Would you like to air that concern? It's not.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, we were talking about the roof lights, but it's my concern is the size of that wall against the two windows. And yes, we've had clarification, but that's a large piece of brickwork or render that would be right in front of those windows. And yes, they are, given that they are a utility room and a bathroom, but it's maybe not enough for me to vote against, but it is a concern I would have.
Right, so it's something you're going to think about. So we're back to Councillor Allen. Are you going to, where are you standing on the roof lights?
I am happy to approve the roof lights if Councillor Muir is happy to second that.
Certainly happy to second keeping the roof lights at the front.
Can I try and clarify where we are? Where we've got a proposer and seconder for the application with additional conditions about working hours? Yes?
Correct.
Yes.
Working hours and permeable paving.
Thank you. And Sean?
Thank you, Chair. All right. Okay, thank you, Chair. Rather than impose a condition on the working hours of builders, normally for larger schemes, we would impose a condition requiring a construction management plan, which would include matters such as working hours for officers to approve, along with, for example, where materials are stored during construction, where vehicles park and that kind of thing. In this instance, there's no space on site for a vehicle to park, but obviously the construction management plan would deal with the matters of detail during construction. Thank you. So we could impose a condition requiring the submission of a construction management plan.
And paving?
Yes, we could impose a condition requiring paving to be permeable, certainly, in the interests of the drainage of the site.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Allen? Councillor Muir?
Yes, I'm certainly happy with the officer's recommendations on those.
Thank you. Shall we go to the vote? Sorry, we're going to have a debate. I'm sorry, it says so much, I thought we debated. Who would like to contribute? Councillor Tyson.
Having said that, I suppose I ought to make a contribution. The issues that were foremost in my mind were whether this would represent an overbearing structure to the neighbour and affect their quality of their life in the rooms in number 7. But having heard that it's a utility room and a bathroom, I'm less concerned about that now. I believe we have no guideline that restricts the proximity of a single-storey extension to the boundary between that property. And also we have heard that the occupants at number 7 haven't made an objection to this on those grounds anyway. So as a result of that, I would be happy to go along with the recommendation to approve this.
Thank you. Councillor Bloxham.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I understand exactly what Councillor Tyson said, but I just wouldn't want a wall that size less than, what was it, 200 or 300, 800 mil.
It's from the fence.
Yeah.
Not from the building.
Yeah, but it's still very close, isn't it?
I'd have to ask somebody else for the details, but the space between number 7 and the fence is much wider than the space between the proposed building and the fence number 5.
Straight out.
Any details on that?
I've measured the plans as I believe it is 0.8 approximately to the boundary, and perhaps another 10-20 centimetres beyond that. So approximately 1.10 metres to the extension side elevation.
Okay, are we ready to go to the vote? So the vote is to accept the proposal as put forward by Councillor Diane Allen and explained by Sean Greaves. So you're voting yes to accept it.
With additional conditions, please.
Oh, sorry, with additional conditions.
Nothing's happened to Jerry Love then. Oh, sorry, it should be okay.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you. If those of you who have spoken already wish to leave, please feel free to do so, or you may stay. We welcome Councillor Hoskins back into the room. A couple of minutes for the changeover. Oh, she's got the right way around. We've just got a couple of minutes, okay, till we get, yes. A couple of minutes while we get everyone back in. So is that back instead of Councillor Morris? Oh, he's gone, has he? I was waiting for him. He's gone. Welcome back. Just make sure we've got everyone in the room that we're expecting. Item 8, 22/00516/FP, land to the west of Lucas Lane and east of Headlands, Grays Lane, Hitchin. Sean Greaves to present, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have no oral update other than a written update was supplied to members a couple of days ago. On the basis that some members may not have seen that, I'll just give a brief summary of the written update. The update confirms certain matters with regards to or clarification with regards to drawing numbers, and identifies a tree survey and arboricultural impact assessment drawing as a submitted plan. The paragraph 4.52 in the report is incorrect. An energy and sustainability statement was not submitted with the application, but this matter is dealt with by condition 10 that's recommended, which would require the submission of such a statement. With regards to ecological impact, reference is made to a revised ecological appraisal and biodiversity net gain metric, which has been submitted to respond to an objection raised by the Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust. And that biodiversity net gain metric identifies actually a net loss on site of 1.17 habitat units. However, that can happen with smaller sites because of the limited space to provide additional habitat. And therefore, the applicant has confirmed that is prepared to make a financial contribution of £15,000 towards off-site enhancements of biodiversity, which would take place in this part of North Herts around Hitchin, which would be on a county council owned site and enhance biodiversity there. Thereby resulting in overall biodiversity net gain from the development. Reference is made in the report to various financial contributions that are required by the county council. The county council has actually withdrawn the requirement for such contributions because, having reviewed their policy, they have concluded that the proposal falls below the threshold for them to require such contributions. Amendments to condition 8 and 9 are proposed as to condition 10, and a new condition is recommended requiring the provision of a soft and hard landscaping scheme. If we start the slide, please. First slide. The crossed site is the site concerned in pink or orange, or what, I'm not sure what colour that is. So the green area up in the northwest corner of the site is an existing area of where there's TPO trees, and that area would remain and not built upon. To the south of the site, there is a bridleway that runs off the end of Grays Lane. To the east of the site, there is Lucas Lane, which is an unadopted road. And the road coming into northwest corner is called West Hill. Immediately to the west of the site, there's a detached house called Headlands. To the south, there is allocated site HT6, for which there's a current application for 47 dwellings before officers. And to the north, there is a care centre for people who are disabled. Next slide, please. This is a layout plan showing the existing landscaping on the site, and you can see that area up in the northwest is where the TPO trees are, which is in grey on that site. And the plan to the right shows the proposed layout of the 9 dwellings that are proposed by this application. Next slide, please. This is a more detailed plan showing the layout of the proposal. As you can see, all the properties are detached and they each have their own garages. The access to the site, to that southeastern corner, would also serve as the access to allocated site HT6, as well as this site for which is allocated site HT5 in the local plan. Next slide, please. This is plans of some of the an example of one of the 5-bedroomed houses proposed. As you can see, it's 2-story with a traditional design, relatively steep roofs and chimney details, etc. Quite traditional. Next slide, please. And this is also a 5-bedroomed house of a similar design with double gable fronting. Next slide, please. And this is one of the 3-bedroomed houses, which slightly smaller, which shows the attached garage. Next slide, please. These are photographs taken from within the site, and this is looking east towards Lucas Lane, and you can see the detached houses that run alongside the east side of Lucas Lane, and the boundary hedge to the front of those houses is the boundary hedge along the eastern edge of the site. There is obviously a footpath that runs through the site. That's not a public footpath, that's just a footpath that is obviously used by locals. And it's clearly well used. Next slide, please. This is also taken from the site, and this is a photograph of those protected trees that I mentioned, looking west, and those trees are again in the northwest corner of the site, and those would be retained within the layout. Next slide, please. This is facing west, looking towards an isolated detached property that is further along Lucas Lane, along the bridle, with access via the bridleway, which runs along the southern side of the site. Next slide, please. And this is a photograph taken towards Lavender Fields, which was the care facility that I mentioned earlier, which is to the north of the site. Next slide, please. And this is a photograph taken looking towards HT6, site HT6 in the local plan, which is currently the subject of an application being considered by officers proposing 47 dwellings. Next slide, please. And these are photographs at the site access, where the access would serve both HT5, this application site, and also HT6, the site to the south. Thank you. So the site extends to about 0.8 hectares and includes that small area of woodland. It's located on the western edge of Hitchin. Upon adoption of the local plan, the site was removed from the Greenbelt. Therefore, it's no longer within the Greenbelt, but forms part of the settlement of Hitchin. Therefore, as I set out in the report, the site is acceptable in principle for residential development because it's allocated in the local plan for that type of development. And the application seeks full planning permission for 2 3-bedroomed houses, 1 4-bedroomed house, and 6 5-bedroomed houses. Whilst the number of houses proposed is below the estimate of 16 houses in the local plan, the estimate is just that, it's just an estimate, and the proposal has been assessed against local plan policy HS3, which relates to the mix of housing. And that policy identifies several factors to consider when considering the mix and number of houses on a site, including location and accessibility, the findings of the strategic housing market assessment, and density and scale relevant to the character of the area. This is a small-scale development with several constraints, including existing trees and hedgerows, site access provision, which also includes site access for the proposed residential development to the south. It's an edge of town location, and the scale and character of housing in the vicinity is that of relatively large detached dwellings. Therefore, officers considered that although this site is below the estimate set out in the local plan, the proposed numbers and density is actually appropriate to this low density edge of town setting. The proposed design and layout is considered acceptable and contextually appropriate in accordance with local plan policy D1. A woodland area protected by the TPO would be repurposed as a public space, and the proposed indicative landscaping and boundary treatment would be acceptable. That would be subject to the additional suggested landscaping condition, which requires provides details of the landscaping proposed. The proposed development would be acceptable in terms of living conditions of future occupiers and neighbours, and the application includes a proposed access off Grays Lane near the junction with Lucas Lane that would also serve site HT6, as I've mentioned before. At this point, Lucas Lane becomes a bridleway beyond that point, and the local planning authority consider that the proposed development is acceptable subject to conditions. And it's recommended on that basis that planning permission be granted subject to the conditions proposed in the report and the update, and also subject to a Section 106 obligation, no longer requiring financial contributions to the County Council because they've withdrawn that requirement, but towards the delivery of off-site biodiversity net gain. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the members? Councillor Nolan?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few just quickly to clarify. So firstly, in terms of that extra piece of road access to this number 6, site number 6, that will be provided regardless of that application. That will be provided under this application, regardless of the success or otherwise of that separate application.
That's correct. This application will be dependent upon that access as well as the other site. So this application would provide the access shown on the submitted plans, okay, which would also enable access to HT6.
Okay. You've stated there that I think it was Lucas Lane, and just correct me if I'm wrong, if I misheard you there, Lucas Lane is currently an unadopted road.
That's correct.
Knowing the condition that is and the extra traffic there, is there any indication that that status may change and that may be a fully maintained road going forward?
Grays Lane accessing the site is an adopted road. Lucas Lane, which runs north-south along the eastern boundary, there's no proposals, as far as I'm aware, to change the status of that highway. Access along Lucas Lane is not necessary in order to gain access to this site. They would come in along Grays Lane and come into the site just as you approach from the east. And
then, sorry, final one as well, just on the addendum that's provided, just somewhat uninitiated on the measures exactly, but can you explain roughly what is meant by 1.17 habitat units?
Well, I'm not an ecologist, but basically what ecologists do, they identify certain types of flora with different values and create what is called a biodiversity unit, depending upon those values. It's a means of quantifying the benefits to biodiversity from various species, and they lump it all together and create what is called a biodiversity unit. The metric measures the existing biodiversity on the site and attributes a unit number to it. And also the metric assesses the biodiversity merits of what's being proposed. Based upon the species, etc., because different species are given a greater weighting compared to other species in terms of benefit to biodiversity and the environment generally. As a result of that process, which uses a spreadsheet that has various loadings, etc., that spreadsheet, which is a DEFRA spreadsheet, came to the conclusion that there was really a net loss on site of 1.17 biodiversity units. Herts Ecology on other sites within the authority have indicated that a cost for delivering one biodiversity unit, because quite a few sites will have to deliver biodiversity off-site due to the nature of the site, as £12,000 per unit in terms of the cost of delivering the various plants, etc., and enhancing existing sites. And that's where the £15,000 contribution has come to. That would ensure net gain rather than just a neutral provision of biodiversity. Thank you.
Is that fine, Councillor Nolan? Councillor Moody?
Thank you. I was happened to be up there at Blue Hearts watching my son play cricket, which he lost. So I took a walk down and had a look around. You just confirm there seems to be a public footpath unless the sign's been moved. Just confirm there's no public footpath across the land.
I'm not aware of public footpath.
I'm just looking at the Google Maps.
Yeah.
There seems to be a walked pathway through the land. So I don't know whether the sign's been moved, but there was certainly a sign pointing across this land.
No, not across the land. There's a public. The bridle way is also is obviously a public footpath, and the bridle way you can horses can go along the bridle way as well. And Lucas Lane is also classed as a.
But there's nothing across the land at all. Just, even from Google Maps, I just had a look now. It looks like a well-torn path across the land.
There is, as I showed on the photographs earlier, there seemed to be a well-used path along across the site, but that's not a public footpath within, as identified in the definitive map held by the County Council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Muir.
Thank you. I see on conditions 12 and 13 about tree protection, but are there going to be any tree planting around the site at all? I can't find anything in the report about extra trees.
There is a illustrative landscape master plan that does show some enhancement of new planting. It is limited due to the space, etc. If we put in too much landscaping, there wouldn't be even sufficient room for the 9 dwellings that are proposed as it stands. There's also the additional condition I suggested regarding the requirement of a detailed landscaping scheme, which will reflect the illustrative master plan landscaping scheme that's been submitted, which does propose some additional landscaping on the site, but also some thinning out of the woodland where TPO trees are, so that the better trees have a better opportunity to survive or thrive.
Thank you.
Councillor Peace.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier on in the process, Highways rejected this application because the road use wasn't giving priority to vulnerable road users, such as the people using the bridleway. And I understand it was revised, and now that Highways are happy with it. But what is the change that has been made to ensure that the vulnerable road users, people using the bridleway, now have priority?
A revised plan was submitted by the applicants that I identified some revised works that proposed and clarified certain matters, and that satisfied the initial concerns raised by the Highway Authority.
Councillor Daniel Allen. Sorry, Councillor Daniel Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about representation 3.8, waste and recycling. There was a question from the waste and recycling team about the on-site household refuse and recycling facilities and collection arrangements. Can I just ask how that's been resolved or followed through on, please?
It's not clear that a condition actually has been imposed requiring the submission of a waste management scheme. Such matter that was originally a provision within the section 106 that the County Council have actually now said they don't require. Waste Service 1 that 1,929, actually that was towards new recycling centre development for Letchworth. So I believe that there should be a further condition from what you've just mentioned, requiring the submission of a waste and recycling scheme.
Thank you.
Councillor Tyson?
Thank you, Chair. Sean, I think this might actually relate to the question from Councillor Peace earlier on, but towards the end of your presentation, you mentioned that the issue of the bridleway had been dealt with by condition. And I was just wondering, because I can't see it here, what that condition is or will be.
No, it wasn't to be dealt with by condition. It was dealt with by further clarification and revised drawing, which satisfied the concerns that were raised by the Highway Authority. They changed their comments as a result of that to the conditions that are recommended in the report.
Okay.
Can I just follow on from that? Have we got a response from Rights of Way about the bridleway?
We haven't got a response from Rights of Way about the bridleway. No diversion is being proposed, and the free and safe passage of people using that bridleway would be ensured by this proposed scheme based upon the submitted drawings. In other words, the Rights of Way will not be diverted or impeded anyway by this proposal.
So the confused look on my face as I was trying to think, have I seen these drawings?
Yes, one of them was in the display earlier, which showed the access coming in.
Could you show that again?
Yes.
Please?
A later drawing would probably be more helpful. That one, yes. Sorry, go back. So that shows the existing road that comes in from the east, which is Grays Lane, and that continues and veers into the site. And opposite the site to the south, there's also an access proposed to the other site HT6. The bridleway will continue to run along this site, and there's no impediment, as you can see, coming from east to west. The bridleway will be totally unaffected, actually, to the front of plot 3, which is that plot in the centre to the south of the site, and beyond that point, the bridleway is outside the red line, and no works are proposed there. So people will be able to walk along the footpath, roadside footpath, up to the point where you access the site, and beyond that, access would continue along the bridleway.
Thank you. I was just points of clarification for myself, compared to what I believed was factually correct earlier on this week. So, for instance, the 1 unit of biodiversity, if it went ahead, the applicants would be expected to pay for it.
That's correct, yes.
Yes. And the section 106 money, which is due to the size being over the 0.7 area, is that going ahead?
No, it's not. The County Council reviewed their policy with regards to the threshold for Section 106 contributions. Now, that threshold is normally 10 units, and this is 9, so it's below that threshold, or half a hectare. Now, this is over half a hectare, but what they failed to take into account is where it's the threshold is if it's over half a hectare, where we do not know the number of dwellings proposed. In other words, an outline application. And under those circumstances, for example, a developer might say at this point around 9 dwellings, but submit a reserve matters for more. So the County Council have reviewed this application against their policy. And because they know the number of houses, despite the fact that it is over half a hectare, it is below the threshold. 9 is proposed, it is a full application, and therefore Section 106 obligations aren't required by the county council.
So the ones I saw were, for instance, for 16 dwellings.
The one you saw was actually for 9 dwellings, and the county council had misapplied their policy.
Right.
They considered that because the site was over ½ a hectare, then contributions should be made for the 9 dwellings. However, the policy actually says if it's over ½ hectare and they don't know the number of dwellings, then they will require financial contributions. But they do. It's 9 dwellings. It's below the threshold.
Okay, so my last question. So we are still talking about 9 dwellings, which are 9 large houses with no affordable housing.
That's correct. It's below the threshold for affordable housing. Yes.
Thank you. See where we're up to on here. Thank you, Sean. Can we go to registered speakers, please? Subjects to Phil Davis.
Before I start speaking, could I just apologise to the councillors? Am I on? Oh, yeah. Could I just apologise to the councillors for the lateness of the email that was sent out and the document? I don't know whether you've had a chance to look at it, but if you could view the pictures, the photos while I'm speaking would be good. But I've got one copy here, if anybody would like to just.
I'm sorry, Phil, but we received the email at 5:15.
I know that.
And so it's very hit and miss who has been able to see it.
Yeah, I know.
You're just going to have to go with it in your 5-minute speech.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was just difficult. We had some technical difficulties because of the size of the document, and it wasn't received by the council, unfortunately. And so we had to use a different email address, and it was, yeah, problematic. Okay.
Go for it.
Okay. Right. So, good evening, Chair and councillors. My name is Phil Davis. I'm here to speak on behalf of Save Hitchin Green Belt, now over 6,500 supporters and local residents. There are many reasons why this planning application should be refused, but primarily huge loss of biodiversity, loss and damage to preserved priority habitat, destruction of ecology and wildlife habitat, including protected species, site access extremely problematic, increased pollution, and some local housing numbers I'll come to later. Councillor Hoskins will talk about site access and pollution. So the first point is harm to biodiversity. The removal of this wild, uncultivated grassland will be a huge loss of biodiversity on this site. All and many professional publications will tell us that wild, uncultivated grasslands act as a carbon sink and absorb 1 tonne of carbon per hectare. The National Planning Policy Framework states if there is significant harm to the biodiversity, then planning permission should be refused. The developer not only intends to remove all the grassland, they also want to remove mature hedges and trees, including 3 sizable horse chestnuts, resulting in a massive biodiversity loss. Priority woodland and damage and isolation. The plans are in contradiction with the TPO on the protected woodland, showing no regard for wildlife and making it a playground. The plans show the woodland becoming isolated with no access at all for wildlife and making a mockery of the TPO. The development shows no regard for woodland TPO by closely surrounding with houses. Indeed, the developer originally wanted to bulldoze it. The developer's ecological survey is incomplete, inaccurate, and misleading. There's no mention of the TPO or the priority habitat, and it states the site is not covered by any statutory or non-statutory wildlife site designation, which is wrong, of course, because of the TPO. The woodland is actually referred to as dense scrub, whereas many trees there are over 25 feet. And there's no mention of insects, wildlife in here, badgers, deer and foxes, and no bat survey. The grassland is classified as low relative conservation or biodiversity importance and does not present a significant development constraint. This is wrong. Non-cultivated grassland is very important and a great biodiversity asset. The horse chestnut trees are wrongly labelled as small. They're quite large, actually. That's one of them's got a circumference of 6 feet and over 30 feet tall. There is obviously an emphasis on saying how poor this site is with loss of biodiversity and little mention of animals. I see no night survey, which is surprising as most of the animals here come out at night. By just a few nighttime visits, we have captured deer, badgers, foxes, and bats, and mostly even bats come out on the bridleway and fields to feed. Of course, badgers and bats are protected species, so their habitat needs to be protected. Great harm to the ecological balance. This is one of only 2 uncultivated grasslands in West Hitchin. Anyone seeing the recent David Attenborough films about wild grasslands will understand the importance. It was stated the decline in butterflies and insects is a direct result of the destruction of grasslands. Destruction of the feeding grounds for bats and badgers, to name 2. The badgers will search down the roads for food, threatening the local hedgehogs population, plus the local lawns. The large population of birds, over 25 different species identified in one day, will obviously be threatened. It was stated in the local plan meeting, the greenbelt sites were selected
1 minute
because
left.
the need for affordable houses for Hitchin. Well, this development does not fulfil this requirement or need. £9 million houses, without a doubt. There has been a significant number of new developments in Hitchin since the local plan numbers were provided. We inform this is an acceptable windfall site, but it is more like a great storm. Surely they can be traded off against unsuitable developments such as this. It was stated at a Hitchin Town meeting last year that sites could still be removed from the local plan and returned to green belt. Well, now is the time. The latest government strategy is to make local plan housing numbers advisable and not compulsory, so there's flexibility here. Conclusion. I know the council will be concerned that if they refuse this application, it will cost money if they lose the appeal. However, considering the above and all the evidence we can provide, I'm sure the government inspector will look on this more favourably. Plus, the inspector did state that the bridleway should be preserved as far as possible, and making a large road junction is hardly doing this. We will also be happy to support and communicate with the inspector and gain support. Okay.
Thank you. Your time's up. Thank you very much. Any points of clarification from members? No. Can I then please go on to member advocate, Councillor Keith Hoskins?
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, just due to some confusion, mostly on my part, only I registered to speak, whereas I was originally going to share my 5 minutes with Chris Lucas, who did the statement for me on air quality. So I'll do my 2.5 minutes and then I'll pause the breath and then read Chris's statement out. Okay, so here we go. One of the material considerations for this application involves traffic volume, noise, highway safety and air quality. The last of these I'll read later. Highways initially had objections and recommended refusal. Highways continue to acknowledge that there are issues of congestion, as their own capacity assessment indicates that the junction, and by this junction I mean Purton Road, Offaly Road, A505, Ratton Road West and Grays Lane, down to the Paynes Park roundabout, operates over capacity, particularly during peak rush hours, which are themselves extending beyond the norm. As has been alluded to, Highways first refused this, saying, given the nature of the access with multiple routes and user groups intersecting at this point, and they meant on that one Lucas Lane, Grays Lane and Crow Furlong, the Highway Authority feels that a new Stage 1 safety audit should be commissioned to assess the risks related to the proposed arrangements. For these reasons, the Highway Authority recommended refusal. On the second report, which accepted the application, I can't find a mention of a safety audit, but under the public rights of way, they noted that the proposals included amendments to the public bridleway and Lucas Lane. The HTC rights of way team should be contacted to submit a statutory consultee response. And I think we've again said that we've not seen that. There seems to be little acknowledgement of the obvious issues about establishing a road junction on the bridleway with horse riders, dog walkers, runners and cyclists in the mix. A road junction at the confluence of a bridleway and an unadopted road does not demonstrate how access to the development will prioritise pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders over motorised vehicles, in line with the user hierarchy that forms a key part of Hertfordshire's fourth local transport plan, as well as paragraph 112 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Little consideration has been given to how to mitigate adverse cumulative impacts on the area. Ortonhead Way, Gaping Lane, Bedford Street, Lavender Way, which already suffer from lack of off-street parking, difficult access for delivery and emergency vehicles, as well as from those attempting to shortcut to avoid the already at capacity roundabout at the Hitchin Library roundabout, the confluence of the 600, the 505 and the 602. It is disingenuous to say that this development will have little detrimental effect. How many more developments are we going to see applications for in tightly constrained areas before we take into account the impacts on quality of life for our residents? Highways need to take a more holistic overview of how these individual applications added up result in an unacceptable lowering of environmental standards for residents. At the very least, insist on greater detail on traffic impacts. I'm now going to Chrissy's statement. There are two areas in North Herts that have been designated to be areas of concern for air quality, and they're both in Hitchin. One of these is Paynes Park Roundabout. The air quality is deemed so poor with nitrogen dioxide levels above set government limits that in 2018, NHDC, along with Herts County Council and other partners, wrote a report entitled the Air Quality Action Plan for Paynes Park and subsequently put in place air quality management orders to try to reduce these dangerous particulates, particularly nitrogen dioxide in the air around Hitchin. According to government statistics, air pollution is associated with a number of adverse health impacts. Additionally, air pollution affects the most vulnerable in society, children and older people, and those with heart and lung conditions. North Herts District Council is committed to reducing the exposure of people in North Herts to poor air quality in order to improve health. So potentially we could be adding to it, not reducing it. The access to the proposed sites will be up Grays Lane from Paynes Park Roundabout, a known hotspot for nitrogen dioxide. According to 2018 report, heavy goods vehicles are responsible for over a quarter of nitrogen dioxide particulates. Clearly, this report was written 5 years ago, and now motorised traffic has gone up across the town, adding more vehicles to the road in terms of
1 minute, please.
Thank you. HGV, when the housing has been developed and with private vehicles, will lead to even more traffic jams and subsequently more pollution. Today was a case in point. According to today's AccuWeather report, the air quality in Hitchin is poor. This means that the air has reached a high level of pollution. It is unhealthy for sensitive groups, and you're warned to reduce time spent outside if you are feeling symptoms such as difficulty breathing or throat irritation. According to Europa Air, air pollution can lead to a wide range of diseases, including stroke, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and other lower risk respiratory infections and aggravated asthma. They go on to say that 238,000 premature deaths as a result of the inhalation of fine particulate matter. We must do everything we can to stop this from impacting the residents of Hitchin,
Right, thank
particularly
you.
in known hotspots such as Paynes Park.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any points of clarification from the members? Councillor Tyson?
Quick question to Keith and Chris as well. Did you know that today is National Clean Air Day? I just wanted to get that.
Yeah.
Councillor Nolan?
Yeah, so you mentioned there about some of the highways works and reports that have been provided. Did any of them actually look at the roundabout and the access along Upper Tilehouse Street, or were they just focused on Lucas Lane and the entrance point there?
I think that's my point. I think they were too narrowly focused. Lucas Lane is the only access and egress really from that site. We've already heard from the officer that Lucas Lane is an unadopted road and unlikely to be of a standard sufficient, but people still do run through this area because they want to avoid the congestion on the main roads. So that adds to it. So I think there are wider highways impacts, and I don't think we've researched that fully. We're just, you know, we've not being flippant, but I get the impression that there's a highways officer looking at Google Earth going, oh yeah, we can fit 9 houses in there, and not looking at a wider picture of what the impact is going to be. And, you know, we're going to have the same thing with the application currently under consideration by officers on the site next door of
Keith, let's not
47.
go that way.
Sorry.
Yeah, just stick to this one. Can I then go to supporters Will Berry? Okay.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I'm Will Berry, a development surveyor at Hill, a family-owned and operated five-star house builder, strong track record of delivering high-quality, award-winning developments. The application sites have been allocated for housing in the current local plan, and our designs have been developed following both public consultation and discussions with planning officers. The full application we have brought forward is a result of design-led approach, which considers the site's constraints, the surrounding character and context, and importantly, has been influenced by an adjoining area of existing vegetation covered by a blanket TPO that will be enhanced and made publicly accessible. The enhancements will include selective thinning, coppicing, supplementary planting and seeding, which will allow more light in and increase the species and structural diversity of its current dense form, which prevents variety on the ground floor species being established. In addition to enhancing the TPO'd area, further ecological benefits include the provision of bird and bat boxes, hedgehog holes between garden fences, and log pile bug hotels. The proposed development comprises 9 detached homes of 3, 4, and 5 bedrooms, with appropriately sized gardens, adequate parking provision, and around 0.15 hectares of open space, of a total site area of 0.83 hectares. The design-led approach has considered the character, materials, and architecture of the existing homes in the area, as well as the opportunities and technical constraints of the site location. The development proposals are in keeping with the character of the area and will use red and mixed brickwork for walls and black and red roof tiles. All homes will be 2-storey with pitched roof form, as is predominant in the local area, and will include architectural features drawn from the local housing vernacular, including projecting bay windows, brick banding details, and soldier courses above windows. The density of development reflects that of the surrounding area and will therefore provide an appropriate transition between the existing homes and the open countryside beyond the headlands to the west. The new homes will be highly energy efficient as a result of using a fabric-first approach, which maximises the performance of the components and materials that make up the building fabric, and will also be served exclusively by air source heat pumps for heating and hot water. In addition, EV charging will be provided to every home. The local plan requires that access is provided to serve both the application site and the neighbouring allocated site. We have worked collaboratively with the developers of the neighbouring site and county highways to design an access arrangement that is acceptable to all parties, which seeks to minimise the amount of hedgerow loss. The proposed access arrangement provides pedestrian prioritised crossing from Grays Lane Bridleway to Lucas Lane, and also provides safe and practical vehicle access to properties accessed via the Grays Lane Bridleway. Site layout has had to work around a number of fixed constraints. The joint access arrangement to serve both development sites can only be located in its proposed location on Grays Lane. The area of open space needs to be treated more sensitively than at the time of the draft local plan allocation, as it is now under a blanket TPO. And the right way to address this is from a design perspective, is to have the houses set back and fronting onto the area. There is also a private foul sewer that runs west to east across the southern part of the site. These constraints have directed the road layout of the application, and we have then had to consider back-to-back distances, appropriate garden sizes and parking provision, as well as suitable offsetting from the site boundary to allow hedgerow retention and prevent overlooking of the existing properties. Our proposals have successfully accounted for all of the constraints whilst creating a highly attractive development from an architectural and landscaping perspective. In summary, we have consulted extensively with the neighbouring developers and highways to provide a junction arrangement that enables access to both of the allocated sites. A design-led approach has resulted in proposals that are sensitive to the location and are in keeping with the character of the area. The development will provide high-quality, low-carbon family housing that will enable public access to an ecologically enhanced area of open space. We respectfully request that members endorse the officer's recommendation to approve the application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any points of clarification? I have one. Could you tell us a little bit more about the garages? The size of the garages, and do they have pitched roofs?
Yes, yeah, all the garages have pitched roofs and they're built to the standards required by North Arts District Council, which I think is slightly larger than the typical garage size.
I'm asking this because my theory is that nobody puts a car in a garage anymore. And I just wonder every time I see the applications. I also wonder about the pitched roofs, why they are necessary, or are we actually looking at garages which could be later be converted?
Three of the houses. So I'm on,
Maybe that was unfair. I'll take it back. It probably was unfair.
I'm back on again now. Okay. So yeah, 3 of the garages have got studios over the top of them, so they absolutely require pitched roofs. And then for consistency of architecture and to create a common language around the development, it's important that the rest of the garages also have pitched roofs.
Thank you. Any other questions? That's okay. Can we go back to planning officer? Oops. I'm sorry, you're very late to that one. Councillor Tyson.
Yes, just one. Can we just have a quick look at the housing mix and looking at our local plan? It says on most suburban and edge of settlement sites, applicants should make an initial assumption of 60% larger and 40% smaller, i.e. 1 or 2 bed homes. So at some point you decided that that initial assumption wasn't pertinent to this particular site. And you've already said that the housing mix reflects the neighbourhood. But I think that is potentially a little bit questionable. So what was it that guided your thinking when you discarded that initial assumption?
Thank you for the question. We think this is a really strong location for family housing, being on the edge of settlement with easy access to the countryside. There's a hockey and cricket club within very short walking distance, schools within walking distance. And in terms of density, and it's about providing that appropriate transition from the existing housing to the open countryside beyond the headlands, which is the west of the development site. I think there's another part to your question, sorry.
No, that was it really. It was just that you know, your decision to provide 0% of smaller houses rather than the 40 that the local plan recommends was what I was trying to find a justification for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's due to the strength of the location for family housing, and also believe that the if you look at the most recent housing delivery data, I think there's been an over delivery of smaller units across in the district. So larger houses are more needed house type.
Thank you. Any other questions? Can I go back to the planning officer, please?
Yes, it is correct. 8.19 of the local plan, which is the post-amble, if you want to call it that, to policy HS3. It confirms that there has been a greater delivery of smaller dwellings compared to larger dwellings. Policy HS3 is reasonably flexible on the matter, as I mentioned before, and there's various considerations you take into account in considering where the proposed housing mix is appropriate. And those do relate to matters such as location, for example, on the edge of settlements, the character of the immediate area. As I mentioned earlier, many of the dwellings in the immediate vicinity, or all the dwellings immediate to the east, for example, of the site are large detached dwellings. So it was considered contextually appropriate in this instance. But Councillor Tyson is correct to point out that 8.21 of the plan does indicate on that basis, on the edge of town locations, 60% can be larger and 40% smaller dwellings. In this instance, there's one three-bedroomed house, I believe, from the mix.
The definition of smaller dwellings is 1 or 2.
Yep.
Sorry. Have you heard that? Would you like to put your microphone on?
That was just referring back to that 8.21, the definition of smaller dwellings as 1 or 2 bedroom houses.
Thank you. Do you have any other comments generally?
Generally, it isn't clear from the council's records as to the involvement or not of the rights of way officer more lately. The recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to a section 106 obligation, which would take time. The recommendation could also be to clarifying with the rights of way officer that they are content with the current proposed arrangements regarding the access and the bridle way.
Okay. Do we have a proposer? Councillor Bloxham.
Yes, I'd like to propose, please.
And what would you like to propose?
Propose acceptance of it and pass the planning application.
With the condition about the bridle way?
Yes. Yes, please.
Councillor Daniel Allen.
Can I also ask that we have the condition on the waste and recycling put in as well? But I'm not offering to second.
Do you accept that, Councillor Bloxham?
Yes,
As
thank
a
you.
proposer? So we've got two conditions so far. Do we have anyone to second that?
No, I think that was. Yeah.
Councillor Allen said he wasn't seconding. No, said he wasn't seconding. So we still, Councillor Muir.
I will second it.
Can we go to debate, please? I've got a proposer and a seconder with the two conditions. Councillor Nolan.
I think from the application that's come forward, I think with the conditions included, I don't think there really is a viable means by which we could really reject this application, given that it's an identified site within the local plan. I think it's really just to raise concerns again that we're in a similar situation that's happened previously, where we've got these small parcels of land which represent separate sites. The sites aren't large enough then to really fall under the need to provide affordable housing. As anyone's probably seen in the news recently, with the cost of housing increasing, we're in we are really hands tied about providing affordable homes in the right areas for residents. And it's a real shame that we can't really do much about that on this particular application. That probably would be useful if HT5 and HT6 could have been a combined site. And if that had been done previously, then we'd probably be looking at a different situation now. But again, I think as a committee, there isn't really much of an option otherwise than to, obviously, as we have to do, take each site as a singularity and vote on whether or not it falls within the regulations.
Thank you, Councillor Nolan. Other comments, please. Councillor Tyson.
I'd just like to say that I agree with everything that Councillor Nolan just said, and I do think that, we've got a local plan now, and we should really be being quite robust about what we expect it to deliver for us. And I'm finding it quite hard to sort of sit here listening to an applicant with the famous 9-house proposal, whereby I think we're quite aware of what motivation lies behind that particular number of dwellings on a plot and how it fell down from 16 to 9. Well, I find that disappointingly predictable, to be quite frank. On the transport side of things, I don't think we've talked about the S106 money that's going to be coming if HT6 goes ahead, which would presumably cover some mitigation for this site.
In consideration of HT6, the council have been in discussions with the county council, and there would be Section 106 obligations relating to sustainable transport in relation to that application. But this application is below the threshold for such a contribution from the county council.
So does that mean we have to disregard what may be in the future from HT6 whilst assessing this particular application.
That's correct. HD6 is a separate application. It hasn't been determined yet. And this application is considered on its merits. This application is below the threshold that the County Council have considered. It's below the threshold for contributions towards sustainable transport, and therefore they're not seeking such contributions for this particular application.
Okay. Councillor Bloxham.
Thank you. Well, I ought to, Dean, as I proposed it, I ought to say a few words, but really it's already been said. I think it's the size of it that does it for me. It's 9 houses. Yes, they are large houses, not affordable houses, definitely not affordable houses. But I think it's a development that would work. And I don't see any real planning reason why we can go against this.
Other comments? I do think that residents would like to hear your comments and your thought processes on this before we vote, if possible. Councillor Pearce.
I'm concerned by the biodiversity loss. And yes, that can be mitigated by spending money in other places, but you cannot simply buy back diversity loss.
Other comments? The councillors not commented already. Wish to do so. So we have got a proposed seconder. We have got 2 conditions.
I just interject, sorry. I think it's 3 conditions. I think at the start, Sean had asked for an additional condition on soft and hard planning scheme, I believe, Sean.
Yes, there's 2 additional conditions. One's in the update, which is for a landscaping scheme, and a further condition requiring a scheme for a waste strategy scheme for implement. The rights of way isn't a condition. I recommended that we seek clarification from the County Council's rights of way officer that they're content with this scheme because it isn't clear from the documentation that I have before me. So that's obviously, if there is a problem, we would have to report back to committee. The resolution would be to grant planning permission subject to section 106 obligation, during which time we would have an opportunity to confirm with the County Council's rights of way officer that he is now content with the scheme as it is proposed. If not, why not? And if that's the case, we would have to come back to committee to inform committee that is the case. We're not aware that that is the case, but members raised this matter, and therefore, and it's not clear from our system what the rights of way officer had to say. So the time taken to obtain or sign a Section 106 agreement would be ample opportunity to clarify that matter. So the recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the additional condition relating to landscaping scheme, additional condition relating to waste collection and recycling, and clarification with the rights of way officer at the County Council that he is content with the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Tyson.
Yeah, just a quick question for Sean. I don't know if you mentioned it in the updates, but didn't we have an issue about a typo with bat boxes and swallow nests?
Yes, the typographical error in the suggested condition and the update amended that.
Okay, sorry.
33 bat boxes and 33 bird boxes were proposed in the condition, which would have meant houses completely covered in bird and bat boxes. So it's been amended to remove reference to those numbers and just to require a scheme for bird and bat boxes to be approved by the council. Thank you.
Right, shall we go to the vote? Chanel?
Chair, you need to have a casting vote.
I'm sorry, this is my thinking. Should we take the vote?
She hasn't
So
voted.
this is my thinking face at the moment.
No, that's right. I didn't. You want to go again?
Did Councillor Peace not vote? Right.
But she didn't. I wasn't sure whether that was.
Right. Okay. Do you want to go again? Is that fine with everybody? Yes, is that okay to vote again because Councillor Peace missed the vote? Is that okay? Let's vote again.
Chair, that motion is lost. Oh, sorry. Sorry, that motion is carried.
To be clear, it is carried because most of them were, yes, those just don't count. Is that clear? Thank you. Right, let's go on to planning appeals. Sorry, we're just having a comedy in salute. How much gas do you want in there? Thank you, Councillor Moody.
Bear with me whilst I bring the report
Okay.
up onto my laptop. So agenda item 9 relates to planning appeals, and the first table on page 69 identifies the appeals that are currently in that are lodged, to which we have not yet had a decision, and there are about there looks like 6 of those at the moment. And the next table, we refer to the decisions that we've had since the last meeting. We've had an appeal dismissed at Purton Water Tower relating to the erection of a detached dwelling on the site of the water tower. We've had another appeal dismissed relating to extensions and alterations at Lakewood in Rushton Road, Sandon. A further appeal dismissed, a listed building appeal associated with that extension to Lakewood Road, Sandon, also dismissed. A further appeal allowed, relating to first floor rear extensions to a dwelling at Bearton Green in Hitchin. And a further appeal allowed relating again to single story rear extensions to a property at 45 Longmead, Letchworth, and an appeal dismissed at 15 Oakfields Road in Nebworth. So we've had 2 appeals allowed since the last meeting, and I count 4, well, if you count the listed building as well, 5 appeals dismissed in that time. The merits of all of these appeals, they're all relatively minor appeals, and they don't raise any particular issues that I need to report to committee.
Thank you. Councillor Bloxham?
Yeah, it was only just really on those two that were lost, because they do seem to be quite, I understand exactly what you're saying, Sean, but they do seem to be quite simple, single story extensions, but the appeals were upheld. Yeah. So how could we get that wrong? It's probably not the right way of making it sound, but you understand what I'm saying.
One of them actually was a split decision, and we didn't refuse the extension itself. We refused the crossover onto the highway because the highway authority objected, but the inspector came to the view that all the other houses in the vicinity have such crossovers, so there wouldn't be any particular harm, despite the fact that the highway authority objected, and therefore we issued a split decision approving the extensions which are now being built apparently, refusing the crossover, but that appeal was allowed. The inspector allowed the crossover. So it's actually just one rear extension that was actually allowed in the end.
Thank you. That's reported for noting only. So that brings us to the end of this meeting. I close meeting at 9:46. Our next meeting has been rescheduled to the 6th of July. I look forward to seeing you.